Hello, you'll like this one. This one's really good, actually. Come on, come on. Now, if you ever find yourself in London, particularly an area called Temple, and you're walking down the main road there and you see an old medieval looking door that has Temple Church written above it, I highly recommend walking down that little path to the gorgeous building that will stand in front of you. And even if you're more curious, pay the admission charge and have a little look inside. And on one side of the church you might see something that you might find familiar. A bunch of effigies on the floor of old knights and whatnot. Made famous by the film The Da Vinci Code, actually. But there's one particular effigy of a man known as the greatest knight, William Marshal. And it's a name that people tend to not know, actually. When you think of warriors of the past, everyone thinks of Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, real sort of these big names that everyone knows about, but no one tends to know who William Marshal was. And he lived a crazy life and fascinating life. And another one I was obsessed with, I always talk about Musashi, but he was one I was really obsessed with as well. And trust me, have a look around that church, you will not be disappointed. But yeah, he served under 5 English kings, which was crazy. He lived to like 70 odd, which was insane for the time, let alone to live to that age anyway, but to be a knight and to live to that age was insane. So during the 20th century, at an auction in Covent Garden in London, a French scholar by the name of Paul Meyer had been sent over from France to look for French literature from the Middle Ages. And during one of the lots, a manuscript came up, a French manuscript that he had never heard of, and it was called The History of William Marshal. And upon reading it, he soon found out that it was about a knight, supposedly the greatest knight, and that he had a biographer follow him around his whole life. And he cross-referenced some of the events in the biography with real events, and he was definitely real, and the events definitely happened. But he didn't win the manuscript on the day of the auction, which frustrated him for about 20 years because he wanted to read it and really go through it and thought that it would belong to France. But as I said, yeah, 20 years later he ended up tracking down the manuscript at a rare book collector's house and ended up reading it and having it translated, and people started to really understand this story of who William Marshal was. And it's absolutely crazy. He as I said, served so many sort of prominent figures, but no one knew who he was. And then down the line, more and more came out, and then they realised he was buried at Temple Church and his tomb was at Temple Church, and people could still visit him to this day. And people didn't know there was this mysterious effigy that no one knew who it was, and it was this knight who had done some amazing things. But yeah, his biography is crazy, and the stuff that happened in his life is crazy. And some say that he was the inspiration for Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones, and because George R.R. Martin sort of tended to know who he was, and he knew his medieval history quite well. But I'm gonna tell his story now, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's get into it.
William Marshal was born around the year 1146 in Caversham, Berkshire, England. He was the younger son of a minor nobleman who was not going to be inheriting any riches or land anytime soon. His father, John Marshal, supported King Stephen when he took the throne of England in 1135, but he switched his allegiance to Empress Matilda during the Civil War of Succession, which plunged England into the period known as the Anarchy. As a result, a young William was taken hostage by King Stephen. At one point, the young boy was placed into a trebuchet to be hurled towards a castle his father was defending, to which the boy's father replied, "I still have the hammer and anvil with which to forge still more and better sons." King Stephen couldn't bring himself to harm the boy. He was returned to his father when the Civil War ended. At around the age of 12, William was sent to Normandy to train as a knight. The trip across the English Channel would have been very treacherous. During this time, he would have studied biblical stories and Latin prayers, as well as the basic concepts of chivalry and politics. The young man grew to be over 6 feet tall, which was an extremely rare height for the period. His father passed away during the final year of his apprenticeship, and as expected, he inherited nothing. William began to compete in tournaments to earn a living, regularly competing against Europe's top knights in mock battles and often winning. He quickly gained a reputation as a fierce and dangerous competitor, propelling him to fame. In 1168, he served in the household of his uncle, Patrick, Earl of Salisbury. He was part of an escort for Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine near the boundary of her province. The party was ambushed. Marshal was captured while Eleanor escaped unharmed. He was eventually ransomed by the Queen. She held the young knight in high regard. In 1170, after returning to England, Marshal found himself serving young King Henry, the son of Henry II. He acted as a young king's minder, but the relationship was cut short in 1182 after a falling out. Though it did not last long, as Marshal would be at the king's bedside when he passed away in 1183. With the approval of Henry II, William set out on a crusade of the Holy Lands, a trip the young king had been intending to make himself. Marshal carried the young king's cross with him. He spent 2 years fighting in the Middle East with King Guy of Jerusalem and the Knights Templar. Upon returning to England in 1185, Marshal pledged allegiance to King Henry II and served as a captain against his son Richard and his rebellion. William was gifted a large estate in Cumbria for his loyalty. During a battle in northern France, Marshal came face to face with Richard. He spared the prince's life and made a point by killing his horse. Just a few short days after the battle, Henry II passed away and Richard became king. He would be known as Richard the Lionheart. Although they had only recently faced each other in combat, Richard I awarded William with estates in England, Wales, Ireland and France. He was now one of the richest men in the entire kingdom. Marshal was left to govern the country when Richard left for the Holy Lands, leading the Third Crusade in 1890. In 1197, William famously scaled the walls of a French castle at the age of 50. He held it on his own for a significant amount of time. The warden of the castle challenged him, but was cut down in a single strike. Marshal played a major part in bringing about the meeting for the sealing of Magna Carta while serving under King John in 1215. Just a year later, he was made Regent of England and protector of the 9-year-old Henry III after the King's death. At 70 years old, at the Second Battle of Lincoln, Marshal led the King's army against the invading French, astonishingly still leading the charge. William's health began to decline in early 1219. While on his deathbed, he was invested into the Knights Templar, fulfilling a promise he had made years earlier while on crusade. He passed away on the 14th of May 1219 at his Caversham estate, surrounded by his friends and family. He was buried in Temple Church, where his tomb can still be visited today.
So, another mad story, crazy life. One that you can only write about really nowadays. But once again, showing those traits, showing those same traits that all ancient warriors have of overcoming. And remember, this can always be applied to your life. And don't think, oh well, he was a knight and I wasn't. It's you're never going to be a knight, of course, but take those thoughts, pick them out, touch upon all the arts, and apply it to your own. And this is why I do videos of historical figures. You're probably thinking, what's this got to do with mental health or mindset, especially mindset? Well, this is where it all comes from. Learn about these figures, particularly warriors, and you take snippets and you learn. And the more you study these people, the more you'll grow as a person. I mean, that's what books do. They're amazing, especially history books. So yeah, he's particularly interesting read because his father clearly didn't really like his own son, and don't get me wrong, he probably had a better start than most people in the medieval period. The fact he was a son of a nobleman, a minor one at that, but still a son of a nobleman. And when he finished training as a knight in Normandy, knowing that he was going to have nothing, and knowing that he would have no money and not have a purpose, and not having a purpose of any money in the medieval period is pretty unpleasant, I imagine. But if you're ever in London, honestly, visit Temple Church. You'll have a great little visit there, and his effigy is stunning, and just knowing that this mad character is buried below your feet, and like I said, no one knows about him, so pay him a visit. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, link to a free PDF below, 5-day rapid mindset shift. Give it a download. Speak soon, friends.